Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 15th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Currently the Russians took a decision to choose defense state after a few days of counter-offensive operation of attacks on the Ukrainian positions. They achieved some success and the Russians managed to advance in the vicinity of Donetsk area. The Russians managed to recapture some positions in the vicinity of Artyomovsk. The Russians launched a very significant offensive operation in the vicinity of Tarskoye and in the vicinity of Novoselovsk and so on. The Ukrainians tried to counterattack. The Ukrainians don't have any the Ukrainians don't have any superiority at air forces. They don't have F-16 that are trying to force the Western countries to provide them. Mainly the Ukrainians try to use the very old models of Soviet models of aircrafts like Su-24, Su-25s, but this is not enough because Su-34 and Su-35 that the Russians can produce and the Russians have in their army is significantly better in comparison with the old Soviet systems, and there are no chances for the Ukrainians to shut down the Russian air systems, and this is a very big problem. The Western countries don't want to provide the Ukrainians modern weapons because they understand that the Russians can not just hit. This is not just the situation. If the Russians can hit the Ukrainian Western weapon like Leopard or F-16, it's not a problem. If the Russians are able to shut down the Ukrainians' aircraft F-16, this is not a problem because the worst situation if the Russians somehow are able to capture. But we understand that Ukraine is a corrupted country and everything is possible, and I believe that if the Western countries were able to provide the Ukrainian nuclear weapon, I believe that some persons in Ukraine can have some access and can have some possibilities even to sell the nuclear weapon provided by the Western countries to Russia. So that's why the Western countries don't want to provide the Ukrainians modern Western weapon, and that's why the entire situation slowed down the Ukrainian offensive operation and slowed down any Ukrainian progress in the special military operation. When talking about the Kherson front line, the Russians, for example, provided us the video how they managed to discover and to destroy another Ukrainian position on the bank of the Dnieper River. Some sources were saying that Ukrainians have accumulated significant number of forces. Currently, we don't understand whether this operation is a real operation or it's a fake flag by the Ukrainians, and they're just trying to force the Russians to accumulate as much as possible forces on this bank of the river. Who knows? But anyway, the Russians try to save their positions, try to be on the safe side, and they're just bombing and shelling the Ukrainian forces on Ukrainian side of the Dnieper River. And basically on this video we saw how the Russians managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian positions in this building. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce battles, artillery duels on this bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 30 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. Now we are going to the Vremivka, we are going to South Donetsk and Zaporozhye area. Today we got a lot of very interesting updates from this bridgehead. For example, this morning we discussed how the Ukrainians were bombing and shelling the Russian positions, the Russian forces in the south of Petikhatki. A lot of Russian armored vehicles and forces were destroyed as a result of those attacks. As you can see, the Ukrainians have completed their regrouping and currently they're trying to prepare themselves before the next wave of offensive operation. So we'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to achieve some success or not. I believe that they're not able to achieve anything because it's highly, I can't say impossible, everything is possible. I will use the terms like highly unlikely. I believe it's highly unlikely to achieve any success without support of air forces. So that's why let's wait whether the Ukrainians can achieve or not. So let's wait. Now we are moving to the Orekhov bridgehead. The Ukrainians made few attempts to attack. For example, at 11 a.m. of the local time, the Russians reported that the Ukrainians made few attempts to attack the Ukrainian positions, the Russian positions on this bridgehead. For example, in the vicinity of Rabotina during the previous night or this morning, the Ukrainians sent few commandos, reconnaissance squads in the number of F-13 soldiers to discover the positions, to discover the Russian positions, to destroy them, to target the Ukrainian artilleries. All those forces were discovered and tracked by the Russians, and after artillery strike, they were forced to step back. When talking about Petykhatki, this area, there were no changes on the ground. The Ukrainians haven't made real attempts to attack. Maybe there were also some reconnaissance attacks, but without any progress on the ground as well. When talking about Novodanilovka and let's say Rabotino bridgehead, the Russians published very interesting video, the Ukrainians, published very interesting video how they were bombing and shelling the Russian positions in this area. This video is geolocated. This is not the fresh video. I'm not saying that these events took place somewhere on the 14th of July or something like this. According to the sources that provided this piece of information, this video, these events took place somewhere on the 12th of July, so 3 days ago. But anyway, according to the author of that video, the Ukrainians were saying that the Ukrainians were bombing and shelling the Russian positions in this area. So basically, what does it mean? That means that the entire fields between Rabotino and Novodanilovka are in the gray zone. For now, as you can see, maybe this map and my updates on the map is not accurate, and they show us not the real information about this territory. And what does it mean? That maybe there is a very high chances that Ukrainians controls just, let's say, this part of the fields or something like this. At least the video that we discussed right now told us that Ukrainians doesn't have entire control over this territory. So we'll see. I have provided you this video just for some kind of geolocations and understanding of the situation on the ground. In my projection, my understanding that the fields between Novodanilovka, Malotokmachka, Novopokrovka, Novofyodorovka, Verbova, and Rabotino are in the gray zone. Neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians have total 100% control over this territory, and either the Russians and the Ukrainians have possibility to send reconnaissance squads, some forces for mining process, for attacking tanks, armored vehicle squads, and so on. Now we're moving to the south of this territory, and one more time, as we discussed in the morning video, the Ukrainians continue their counter forces duels, and they try to pin down and freeze the Russian forces on this bridgehead. And this, one more time, let's discuss this video. As we see, the Russians were trying to send some reinforcements and reserves to Rabotino, trying to pin down and counterattack the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians managed to discover the Russians' convoy and track that convoy, and as a result of missile attack, they managed to destroy Russian convoy. It's a very big tragedy that not just because of in Russian favor, in the Ukrainian favor. This is the war of the 21st century. This is the war when it's I don't know what you need to have in your mind to use convoys for attacking, to use convoys for redeploying your forces. Okay, of course, you can use convoys somewhere in Crimea. You can use convoys somewhere in the mainland of Russian Federation. You can use convoys somewhere in the vicinity of Kiev. But you can't use convoys along the combat line when you know that all this territory is full of Ukrainian or enemies drones, not just the Russians or Ukrainians, because I believe there are hundreds or even thousands of drones about the, let's say, Orekhov, Gulepoya, Russian drones. And it's not very smart to use the tactics of redeploying your forces using the convoys. But for some reasons, the Russians took a decision to use that tactic, and basically they were punished for the usage of that tactic by destroying with Ukrainian forces another Russian convoy. Now we are moving to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. The Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack Russian positions in Urozhaine, in the vicinity of Staromayorskaya, and the Russians reported that when talking about Vremivka tactical bridgehead, the Russians managed to repel at least 5 waves of attacks in the vicinity of Urozhaine. Let's say in the evening of the previous day, during the night, the Ukrainians somewhere at noon, let's say at 12 a.m. of the local time, the Russians managed to stabilize the entire situation in the vicinity of this bridgehead. The Ukrainians were using a few different waves of attack, of 5-wave attack, and few different waves of groups using like 5 armored vehicles and 60 soldiers in each one. They were trying to attack from different sides, but all of those attempts were repelled by the Russians, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. After the Ukrainians left this bridgehead, they continued or started bombing and shelling this territory with more pressure, and after that they published more videos of destroyed Russian positions in the vicinity of those settlements. And also the Ukrainians continue doing the counter-artillery duels, and basically on this video we see how the 36th Marine Brigade of the Ukrainian forces continued tracking and discovering Russian positions among the fields, and as a result of that hunting, the Ukrainians managed to destroy a few armored vehicles of Russian forces on the south of Rimivka tactical bridgehead. This is also very interesting. As you can see, we on the Military Summary channel, we've seen a lot of videos from the Ukrainian side published by the Ukrainian forces about artillery duels, about the hunting of armored vehicles and so on, and we can have an opinion that the Ukrainians are more successful in these operations and so on. But I can tell you like this, I see that this is a very powerful and very interesting military campaign, media campaign from the Ukrainian sources. They understand what is important, what people want and need to see, and they try to publish them as much as possible geolocated information. When talking about the Russians, they're not publishing they're publishing a lot of updates, but most of them are not geolocated, and that's why it's very difficult to understand where exactly this or that event took place on the combat line. And this is a very big minus for the Russians, and this entire situation, of course, plays in the Ukrainian favor. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings from Petykhatki to, let's say, South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost 210 soldiers and 7 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. In comparison with the previous days, the Ukrainians lost the same number of forces, so as you can see, the level is very heavy, and basically we are like at some kind of climax of the entire situation, and sooner or later this wave, operational tactical wave of attack, will be collapsed or will be able to achieve some success, and we will see some results. But for now, everything is on the same line without any changes on the ground. Now we're moving to the Donetsk front line. The Ukrainians continue offensive operation in the vicinity of Artyomovsk. They continue bombing and shelling Klishchiivka from the north, from the west, from the south, and the Russians reported that, for example, today, during the day, the Ukrainians intensify their actions in the vicinity of this area, and currently the Ukrainians are focused on this forest because after a few first days of offensive operation in this area, the Ukrainians understood that there is just one barrier that they have before capturing entire Klishchiivka, and we're talking about this forest. I will mark you on this map for better understanding what I'm talking about. So this is the most difficult and the most important area and the most important fortification that the Russians have on this bridgehead, and the Ukrainians understand. If they are able to capture these 2 forests, they are able to capture entire Klishchiivka. But the previous days of offensive operations shown us that the Ukrainians weren't able to do this, so that's why they took a decision. If they are not able to capture, then they need to destroy and just to burn this territory to ruins, and they start bombing and shelling this territory, these forests, with every type of weapon they have, trying to reduce just at least leaves and grass and everything that has have color of green, for any reasons, and to reduce the Russian possibilities to hide on this bridgehead. For now, the Ukrainians still haven't managed to capture this territory. The Russians managed to repel every single attack that the Ukrainians made during the previous days. And furthermore, some sources are saying that the Russians launched their own waves of counterattack to the west, and some sources are saying that the Russians managed even to let's say restore some positions and to develop their bridgehead. For now, we haven't received any video or photo confirmations of those developments. So let's wait a little bit, and I believe that in a day we're going to receive more updates, and we will understand the entire picture on this bridgehead. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported, as a result of fierce fightings from Donetsk to Siversk bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 315 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-30. As you can see, the level of losses are very heavy, and furthermore, the Ukrainians published a lot of videos during the previous 24 hours of bombing and shelling the Russian positions. As you can see on this video, the Ukrainians were trying to track the Russians' ammo depot in the vicinity of Paraskoivka. They managed to track, and as a result of artillery attack, probably of HIMARS, but it's not look like a HIMARS attack, maybe just a regular artillery attack. But they just managed to get the ammo depot, and the Russians, there was a very heavy explosion. Furthermore, another geolocated video how the Ukrainians using the swarm drone like tactic was trying to attack the Russian forces, and on this video we see how the Russians were trying to redeploy their forces. They were using just a regular like track, and the Ukrainians attacked that track with drones. We haven't received any numbers of result of that attack, but anyway, this is the situation. Furthermore, another video from Berkhovka, which confirms that the Russians returned control over the settlement. On this video, we see how the Russians were trying to counterattack, sending tanks to attack the Ukrainian positions, but probably that road was mined, and 1 Russian tank got on the minefield. Yes, there was a loss. Maybe it's not a loss, just attack. But anyway, we see that the Russians during the previous counterattacks managed to return positions over this bridgehead and push the Ukrainians to step back to the south of the Berkhovka water reservoir. Now we're moving to the Siversk bridgehead. After 1 day of operational pause, the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade continued publishing more videos of attacking Russian positions in the vicinity of Berestovo using the drones and so on, not just... and basically in this video we see how the 1 battalion of 10th Mountain Brigade of Ukrainian forces bombed Russian armored vehicles in the vicinity of Berestovo. As I understand, the Russians have accumulated significant number of forces on this line. Maybe they're planning to make something, maybe they're preparing themselves to attack in direction of Siversk from this bridgehead. As I understand, the Ukrainians managed to discover that operation, and currently they're bombing and shelling the Russians before the Russian greatest offensive operation. This is not the first video from this bridgehead. Maybe this is 10th or even 20th videos of the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade. As I understand, there are very fierce fightings on this bridgehead from both sides, either from the Russians and from the Ukrainians. Now we're moving to Liman bridgehead. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians lost 70 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. Today we got a lot of very interesting updates, and the Russians reported that during the previous clashes they managed to capture more than 30 strongholds on this bridgehead, trying to develop their positions. And the Ukrainians published also a lot of videos from their side. For example, in this video we see how they managed to track and to bomb Russian armored vehicle using the drone, using just the dropping of the bomb from another Ukrainian drone. So currently this is the war, this is the type of modern war when the parties and the sides, the main weapon that they can use is not artillery, not tanks, but just the regular small drones with a bomb on board. And when talking about the Kupiansk front line, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of Russian counterattack, the Ukrainians lost 20 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles and 2 artillery systems. The situation of this bridgehead is very heavy, and according to some sources, the Russians launched their own offensive operation. As we discussed a few days ago, the Ukrainians announced about evacuation, but we still haven't received any updates or video or photo confirmation on the ground about any progress of the Russians. And this is the most interesting and the most, the most interesting part of this update about the Kupiansk front line. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.